Good afternoon, Chuck Morse, the Morse Force. Welcome to the program. I am trying to be consistent about doing this program every afternoon at 12 noon exactly, but of course, internet being what it is, and I know I'm old school, but in today's day and age, one doesn't have to do it every day at that exact time. However, I'm trying to make that a habit, trying to reach at least three, if not four days per week on weekdays where I go live on Facebook. Just to for program note, the program is then downloaded into YouTube. Please join the YouTube channel, subscribe to it, and also it goes out to a bunch of syndicating entities like iHeartRadio, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, TuneIn, and a group of others. So I'm excited to mention that I'm now conducting an experiment that I hope is going to result in a live program with phone calls. In that I believe I can take phone calls through Skype. Now, I mean, I know again I'm like a troglodyte when it comes to this stuff. I'm a knuckle dragger, so I don't, so you'll have to be patient with me. But I'm going to try it, and I'm going to give out the Skype number. And if you call that number, I believe you will come through and be on the air with me where we can discuss issues. So let me give out the Skype number. You're welcome to call 617-396-4830. That number again is 617-396-4830. Now, the first caller is going to get a free copy, a signed copy of my book. It was published by WorldNet Daily. Excuse me. The Nazi Connection to Islamic Terrorism. I'm giving this free to the first caller to the program. Of course, you'll have to email me your mailing address so I can get it to you. Again, join the program. We are live here at Facebook. The number is 617-396-4830. Now, the issue I want to bring up today is one that it just really rankles me and it frightens me, and that is this continual charge that President Donald Trump and his so-called base, his followers, the people who voted for him, have something against Black people. They don't like Black men and women. They're racist. And, I think that this is a drumbeat that goes to, it's classic. Now, there was, I bring it up now because there was a woman I heard last night on with Sue O'Connell on The Take here locally on cable TV. She's a very good talk show host, very liberal, very fair, however, where she interviewed a woman named Brianna Wu, who is described as an American video game developer. I guess she's quite wealthy. She ran for office, and Brianna Wu talked about this movement, Republicans, Donald Trump, as being so racist that it's like a return to Jim Crow. It's almost like you'd think she was talking about slavery. No, the book, you have to call. Sorry about that. But I'm doing this because I really want to see about getting calls. So I'm getting a message from, actually, he's a candidate for the presidency of the United States. And, we'll have him on the program. But you're certainly welcome to call the show. 617-396-4830. 617-396-4830. Now, this insidious charge is a lie. It is one of the big lies of our times. It has not just been leveled against Donald Trump. It's been leveled against anyone that doesn't genuflect to the left, anyone that doesn't support the Democratic Party. It was leveled against Mitt Romney. It was leveled against John McCain when he was a candidate for president. It was leveled against Bob Dole, probably when he ran against Bill Clinton. It was certainly leveled against George W. Bush. We might remember the commercials when Bush was running for president in 2000, which showed a woman saying, "George Bush killed my father." Her father happened to be an African-American man who was murdered by extreme white supremacist racists, and his body was dragged in the back of a truck. And she basically said, "George Bush killed my father," because he was governor of Texas at the time. Now, Bush responded to that quite brilliantly, and he said, actually, I supported the death penalty for these criminals if they were convicted. And I believe that they were convicted and they were executed for this capital crime. So, it's a charge that goes way back. It's a charge that's leveled at anyone that doesn't genuflect to the left. And it's become extreme and a virtual gospel since President Trump was elected, and even before, during the campaign, that he's got something against black men and women. He's got something against Jews. He's got something against women. He's got something against gay people. In other words, he's a hater. Now, I think we need to take a look at it, rationally. We need to look at the facts, because these are very serious charges. They're the kinds of charges that can destroy a person's career. They can destroy a person's life. Nobody, other than maybe some real nutcakes that you might find under a rock somewhere, wants to be called these things. Now, I'm not here to suggest that racism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, misandry, whatever, anti-woman attitudes, that those don't exist. They do. They always will. You can't eradicate those things. They were an expression of the darker side of our nature. And that, yes, we have to be concerned if any of those things become a part of public policy. That's a very dangerous trend. And it's something that it has happened in this country historically. I would suggest that less so than any other society in history, and that in America, those sorts of movements are the exception and not the rule. But nevertheless, yes, they happen because they reflect, as I say, a dark side of human nature, and one that can at times become predominant in a society and in a political system. But I think that there are interest groups today, and they are on the left, and they are democratic, that have a vested interest in not only keeping racism alive, but fanning the flames of racism for political gain. That's why they call Donald Trump a racist, because they gain from that politically. It galvanizes their base. They are, they're by the way, I'm getting a note here from an emailer who says that the racists are the Democrats. Absolutely. Certainly historically, the party of slavery, the party of Jim Crow. But more currently, it is their policies that have hurt Black people and that have hurt other minorities. And that they keep racism alive because it allows them to continue to divide societies and to attack their enemies. Anyone who doesn't agree with them can be called that. Now, what do I mean by their policies hurting minorities? What I would suggest is that if you take a look at Black progress up until the 1950s, early 1960s, it was substantial in this country. That racism was rapidly becoming less and less a factor in this country. Black people in the face of real racism, like legal government-sponsored racism, which expresses itself in the form of Jim Crow laws and other horrendous vestiges of an ugly time, that these things were being challenged by a largely Christian, largely conservative movement that was led by the late, great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a Protestant minister, and the Southern Conference of Christian Ministers. I forget what it was called. It was headed by Ralph Abernathy, also a Protestant minister. And it was bringing to the fore the fact that racism is immoral. It goes against God's law, which recognizes that all men and women are created in the image of God, regardless of the circumstance of your birth. It's not relevant, whether or not, your skin tone or your ethnic background. We're all equal under God. We're all in the image of God. And out of that idea came the American ethos, which is that, as expressed by Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal. This is a profound Judeo-Christian idea. By the way, not to get into a topic here, but it completely runs contrary to the evolutionary science, which says that we're all at different rungs of the evolutionary chain and that some of us are more evolved than others. We could talk about the science of evolution at another time. I'm bringing this up more of a philosophical issue, as a theological issue that is the basis of our republic in America. Now, we've struggled with it ever since. Obviously, we had slavery at the time, which was sort of grandfathered in from colonial times, and that slavery increased in the South due to the cotton gin and other factors, and that there was certainly racism in the North. But that was an idea that was held by people who were not consistent with the American approach. Now let me dial it up to more modern times, which is what I started talking about. That by the 1950s, after the Second World War, and you had the integration of the military effected by President Truman under the advice of General Dwight Eisenhower, after sports began to be integrated with Jackie Robinson being brought in as a player with the Brooklyn Dodgers by their head of their group, which happened to be Christian, and other advances. I mean, at that point, you had developing in this country, which had always been there, a really growing Black middle class, Black upper middle class, Black property owners, business owners. Black people were really beginning to participate in all aspects of the American dream, all of the blessings and benefits of being an American citizen. And it was moving in that direction quite rapidly, and thank God it's continued moving in that direction. But then in the mid-1960s, after the passage of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, both of which were Republican ideas going back to the Civil War, and both of which were repudiated by the Goldwater Republicans, which is a terrible political mistake. They didn't do it because they were against civil rights. They did it because they didn't like some of the other things that were being baked into the civil rights movement that they felt would move the country more towards socialism. And in that sense, they were correct. However, by repudiating the entire body, they were missing a very basic point, which is that it had been up until that point a Republican ideal to get rid of institutional racism. So by doing that, they lost generations of African Americans and liberals who shifted their allegiance to the Democratic Party. At the same time, you had high-level Democrats who had been racists shift their allegiance to the Republican Party, which was more enlightened. So you had two things going on, but the big mistake was the shift to the Democratic Party because of the stupid and wrong-headed policy of opposing the Republican-authored and created Civil Rights Act of 1965. But once the left really took over the reins of power in terms of our social entities, a social contract, they began to implement policies that hurt African Americans and, by extension, other minorities. They hurt African American business by supporting higher taxes, by supporting more regulation, which made it more difficult for people to get in business. It made it more difficult for small businesses to expand. It made it more difficult for banks to lend money to small businesses and to startups. It hurt business on levels that they can't even be expressed. And that particularly hurts Black business and minority business and smaller business who are just beginning to emerge from a generation of race, of institutionalized racism, and beginning to really flex their muscle and develop an infrastructure. The attitudes, the anti-business attitudes of the left, which came to dominate the Democratic Party, that hurt Black business. It hurt Black entrepreneurialism. The left also hurt the Black church. The Black church, I would suggest, had been on the forefront of Christianity in this country. They had the moral and ethical authority to save Christianity in many ways in America by reinvigorating it, by inspiring it, particularly the Protestant churches, probably Catholicism also, probably Judaism to an extent. And the left, starting in the 1960s, with their infiltration of the National Council of Churches and with their, the pro-communist left, they damaged the Black church. Margaret Sanger damaged the Black church in the 1930s with the Negro Project, knowing that she couldn't push abortion in the Black community as a white activist. So they arranged to pay off Black ministers and corrupt them in exchange for their introducing abortion into their churches. This was while the Margaret Sanger and her group Planned Parenthood were building abortion clinics in Black neighborhoods. Why did she do that? She did it because she was racist. She felt that Black people were, as she wrote in one of her journals, part of a, quote, dysgenic race. And she also collaborated with Fritz Rudin, who was a major theoretician for the Nazis in the 1930s. But let's not go there. That's another subject. The point I'm making here is that the left damaged several pillars of the Black community. They damaged Black business with their anti-business, anti-high tax, high regulation policies. They damaged the Black church by taking away its moral authority through corruption and through anti-religious orientation and beliefs, a belief in an anti-God, actually. They damaged Black families with their nationalizing of welfare. Now, welfare is appropriate, I would argue, not just as a private charity, but also as a public question, if it's handled by local communities and by states, perhaps, so that people at a local level can be handled with dignity if they fall through the cracks, if they can't sustain themselves. They can be helped as individuals. We can address their individual needs. Maybe they're in trouble because they have no family. They don't have private benefactors who can help them. We don't want people in this country to be homeless. We don't want people in this country to be hungry. We don't want people to be suffering in this country. We're one of the richest societies in history. We are the richest. But the best way to address that level of poverty is through local charities and local governments, working with local charities and local businesses. Instead, the left sought a nationalization of charity, calling it, quote, welfare. And it ended up treating people like they were numbers. It didn't treat the individual and their unique needs. Instead, you just had to sign up and you would get a set amount of money. I recently read that there were some economists who believed, starting in the 1960s, that This would improve the gross domestic product because it would put more dollars into the economy, which would then go to consumption. And technically, that's true. But instead of being oriented toward developing work skills, developing business structure that would be able to absorb people who wanted to work, instead, it basically created consumption. It created consumers. It paid people in a sense, in fact, more than in a sense, in reality, it paid people not to work. Now, I don't blame the average person for accepting that money. You know, somebody's banging on your door and saying, hey, come on out. I got a check here for you. You take the check. I would. I blame the government. I blame the left-wing government and their policies for setting up a system by which people would be corrupted in that way. They would be offered this money. And you had left-wing groups after the Johnson administration, when it was given to these nonprofit groups like Acorn, they would go door to door and sign people up for welfare. The result was a demoralization, particularly of minority communities, because they're more vulnerable. And of course, today you have liberal activists who will point to you and say, well, more white people than black people are on welfare. And that's true. I mean, technically. But the fact is that if you take a look at the proportion of the population, I think that black people make up maybe 3%, maybe 5% of the population of the entire nation. So what percentage of black people are in welfare versus white? The point I'm trying to make here is that black people were specifically and deliberately targeted for this welfare program under the guise that there was something altruistic about it. There was something good about it. And the result is that it damaged the black family. Okay, let me give out the number. You're welcome to call in. This is a live program, and I am taking calls. You're welcome to join me, Chuck Morse, the Morse Force, Monday through Friday, 12 noon, most days, at 617 396 4830. 617 396 4830. What is on your mind this afternoon? I'm giving a free book, my book, The Nazi Connection to Islamic Terrorism, to the first caller. You'll be getting a free signed copy of my book, which was published by WorldNet Daily in 2010. So you have the damage done to the black community. You had black mothers, black women who were paid welfare to separate from or not marry their men. Then you had more money paid to black women for having babies out of wedlock. I'm looking at the responses. Someone is emailing me. By the way, you're welcome to join the program live here. You have to call to get the free book, The Nazi Connection to Islamic Terrorism. Come on down. Give me a call. Let's go on the air here. By the way, your call will be carried on YouTube and all those syndicates. 617 396 4830. I am doing this wonderful experiment here in live online radio with calls. I'm hoping that someone calls just so I can see if it works, if for no other reason. 617 396 4830. That's 617 396 4830. Please call in. We're live here at Facebook. And again, the program is syndicated on YouTube and iHeartRadio and all the other syndicating subscribers. All right. And it looks like we are getting a call. Hello, you're on the air. Thank you for calling. Try again. I'm sorry about that. There we go. Let me just see. Give a call again here we go. All right. Hello, you're on the air. Can you hear me? All right, this may not be working here. Nope, there we go. Yes, hi, how are you? Yes, I can. Thanks for joining me.
Hi. You're very welcome, man. I've never been on your show before, but usually I'm on a great show in Texas radio, which is nationwide.
Yeah.
And you said that what's on people's minds these days? Well, there's a bunch of things right now. We got about 30,000 South Americans, Hondurans, heading our way.
Yeah.
And President Trump just fired the HHS secretary, from what I hear.
Right.
And, so what's in store for our borders? What's the limitations? What can our troops actually do? Are they going to stop the invasion? If they do not stop the invasion, I really, truly think that this country will be brought down to its knees. We can't afford the welfare system. You were talking about welfare. I do not think that this country can afford to hand out welfare to the entire South of America and everybody else in the world.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's an end to our borders. It's an end to our sovereignty.
It's an end to our sovereignty. Yes, yeah. It is. And I ran for Congress twice, by the way, in Maryland.
Okay.
And
good experience.
It's very hard to reach the people because it takes money.
It is, and this is an issue that just makes common sense. And the opponents their logic is so twisted. They don't really have logic. They won't answer you if you ask them. What benefit does this country get by letting tens of thousands of people enter the country illegally and then go on welfare? I mean, is that a humane policy? Even for them, is it a humane policy? This group, by the way, from what I've read, the caravans are sponsored by some very radical left-wing groups that are trying to erase national borders. They're internationalists. They want to have the one world ant colony. And
right.
We, as any sane sovereign nation, have a right to decide who comes into the national home. We have a right to decide how they come in if we do say they can. This is no different. And I know sometimes it's good to bring something down to a microcosm. This is like your right, you the listener, and my right to decide who enters into our private home, who enters into our, right? I mean, the government is acting for the nation because we...
Excuse me for interrupting, but did you also hear about the Maryland red flag law, which is illegal search and seizure without due process?
I did not. Talk about it.
And the Republican governors are actually trying to put this out there as a platform. And, we are against this law, this new law in Maryland. And we've just had one death already caused by that law. This is when somebody can make draw out a complaint. Okay, start a complaint, give it to the policeman. Next thing you know, you've got the ATF. You've got everybody knocking and banging down your door, raiding your house, taking all your guns, and charging you with all kinds of things that they're going to dream up things to charge you with.
Oh my God.
It's horrible. I mean, this is totally communism.
Oh, I mean, it's against the Fourth Amendment. Now, isn't a judge have to give a go ahead on that? I mean, this is without
due process.
Oh, that's an outrage.
You don't even know who your accuser is.
That's horrendous. Can you email me some information about that? I'm going to look into that. Also, email me your address so I can send you off your free copy of my book.
Sounds good. I just published a book myself. It's called International Love.
Wonderful.
And my wife and I met in the Ukraine by accident, and we went through the entire immigration system legally the right way. She became a lawful citizen the right way. And I tell in my book all the experiences that I went through, and I give out pointers on what to do, what not to do. And it's really cheap. It's actually it's in Barnes and Nobles. It's an Amazon book. It's called International Love. It's a handbook for Americans actually.
Mm-hmm. Send me a note. I'll have you on the show.
We'll tell your listeners to read that book if you meet or want to meet somebody from another country and actually come in and bring that person in legally the right way.
No, I mean, send me a note. I'll have you on the show where we could do a whole split screen program on it. In the meantime, send me an email, Chuck Morse, number 4, at gmail.com. And we'll talk. I'll get you off a copy, and I really appreciate the call.
So it's Chuck Morse
with the number 4 at Gmail.
At Gmail. Okay, .com.
Yep.
Gmail. Okay, sounds good.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, have a good one. Thanks a lot.
You too, bud.
All right. Okay, and you're welcome to join the program. 617 is our first caller. 617-396-4830. 617-396-4830. Boy, he brought up some good issues. The issue of the caravan, 30,000 people heading for the border, the southern border. You know, I've heard the left complain about the fact that President Trump has called the troops out to reinforce the border with barbed wire. It's terrible. It's costing a lot of money. Suddenly they're concerned about the budget all of a sudden, and they're not going to be home for Christmas. Interesting. All of a sudden they're so super patriotic and super concerned with our military and its missions. He also brings up an issue in Maryland that I need to look into. He referred to a red flag law, which apparently gives police the ability to engage in search and seizure without a warrant and without due process, by which evidence has to be presented to a judge. It's a very serious matter, entering into someone's property. And it's one that really requires urgency. There has to be, evidence that there is an immediate crime, that people are at a direct risk, and there has to be a process by which such a measure can be done. The founding fathers were very concerned about this because during colonial times, the British occupying army would just go into people's homes and take over their property, move in, and just take over everything. So they put this in the Constitution, in the Bill of Rights. Anyway, you're welcome to join the program. 617-396-4830. 617-396-4830. All right, back to my talk about, and by the way, we could discuss anything that's on your mind. Back to my exposition about how the left has damaged the Black community. So we talked about how they damaged Black entrepreneurialism and business. We talked about how they damaged the Black church morally and spiritually. We talked about how they damaged the Black family with welfare, with abortion, with dependency, and with the splitting up of marriages. It was none other than by the way, Lyndon Johnson's Assistant Secretary of Labor, Moynihan, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who would eventually move on to become senator from New York, and who was a liberal Democrat, who wrote a paper that's fairly well known in advance of Johnson's implementing the so-called war on poverty, which was the origin of this nationalization of welfare. And he said, the Black family today is relatively intact. It's something like 80-85% are married, that Black education is relatively intact. I'm going to get into that in a minute. And that the Black family and that Black men and women were on their way toward developing a real economic infrastructure and a genuine integration into the American way of life. And that he was concerned that these welfare programs are going to damage that. He predicted that they would, and he was absolutely right. So you have, on top of the welfare piece and the destruction of the Black family, you've got then children being brought up in a Black household where the mother is on welfare, where the mother is getting housing subsidies. And by the way, they say now that the public subsidies are up to something like the base pay is $20,000 a year. Plus, if you add up the housing subsidies and the allowances and everything else, it comes to maybe $35,000 to $40,000 a year. Why work, right? There's no incentive. But the result is that you have the mother bringing up children, particularly male children, without a male figure in the house, without a father, without an uncle. The men have been demoralized. They've been driven out of the house. Then, of course, you have the introduction of drugs, which is a whole different subject. How that happened, who is behind that. Let's go there another time. You have the destruction of the church, so you have a diminution of moral standards and ethical standards. The result is, and then you have unemployment because people are getting paid not to work. The result is you have idle men. And what happens with that? Crime. People have lost their sense of meaning, their sense of independence, their sense of dignity, and deliberately because of government programs. And so, yeah, you have people who then resort to crime, violence, drug addiction, drug crimes, murders, and every other form of social dislocation and social negativity. This is what's happened to the Black community thanks to liberal, left-wing, racist policies. And then, of course, the final stand, the final agency that actually is trying to do something to help the Black community, the vast majority of whom are still trying to get on with their life. They're trying to get to work. They're trying to have safety. They're trying to pull themselves up, are the police. The police are the ones who are trying to take out these growing numbers of criminals so that everyone else can get on with their lives. And they were demonized, particularly during the Obama administration, when you had Black Lives Matter, which there is evidence that George Soros is behind that, calling for the killing of police, and several police were murdered during the height of that campaign. Now, look, Black Lives Matter, I think since then, has reformed. It's gotten better. They're no longer yelling, having riots, pigs in the blanket, fry them, whatever the hell that was. And then you have suddenly a guy who was inspired by Black Lives Matter drive up to New York City and execute in cold blood while they were sitting in their vehicle. 2 policemen just went right up to the window and shot them dead, and said, "Oh, Black Lives Matter inspired me." Now, putting aside the fact that both of these officers happened to be people of color, one of them was Asian, the other was Hispanic, that's not relevant. The fact is that this kind of violence inspired this kind of violent rhetoric, and that this idea of the policeman who goes out and risks their lives to protect the community is somehow trying to target people because they're Black. I'm not suggesting that this wouldn't happen, but to smear policemen like that, they are the last line of defense for the Black community. I'm getting an email here to discuss Agenda 21. You're right, that is a subject for another day. It's a very interesting subject. I actually have had some direct issues with that in terms of dealing with people who advocate that. And that has a lot to do with the fires in California. Let's just talk about it briefly. Not to digress here, but first of all, it's interesting that since actually the turn of the 20th century, since the administration of Teddy Roosevelt, the federal government has controlled, if not outright owned, I think it's about 2/3 of the surface of the United States west of the Mississippi, under the guise of the National Forest, and that they have done a very poor job of managing those forests. President Trump is exactly right when he raises this issue. Even the New York Times admits that. I was listening to the podcast on the New York Times. My wife likes that, that being Michael Barbaro and his podcast, and he interviewed an expert, and they had said, yeah, that's right. The management of these forests is problematic. The fact is that a forest needs to be managed in the same way that any other agricultural region needs to be managed. It's like managing a farm or managing your garden in the backyard, your vegetable garden. It has to be pruned. It has to be cared for, which means that, especially in a place like California, because it's desert-like climate, you have to go out and prune it. You have to take out the dead wood. You have to chop down certain trees which are either too dry or they're dying. You have to create roads to separate areas so that if there is a fire, it doesn't spread too quickly. I'm not an expert on the subject, but I've read enough about it to know that there are proper methodologies for managing forests and that they reduce fires and which obviously not only helps save lives, but it helps save animals and plants. It's smart environmental policy, but it was stopped by the radical environmentalists who believe in this concept of pristine forests, somehow that a piece of land needs to exist without any human intervention, that there's a virtue to this, which is ridiculous because, of course, there's human intervention. We're here. We are supposed to steward over the planet. That's what the Torah, the Bible tells us. The Torah tells us in Genesis that we're to steward over nature. And if anything, I would, maybe it's another topic to think about, but a lot of the ideology behind this pristine nature crowd is pagan. I think it's the Gaia principle. I don't know enough about it to get into it right now, but that's my suspicion about this. And now the people of California are paying a terrible price for that. It's a horrible thing. And, that's what I see. Anyway, I'm reaching toward the end of the program. I wanted to do this for 1 hour, and we're reaching we got 10 more minutes. So to wrap up my thesis with regards to how the racist left has damaged the Black community. So you have anti-business, anti-church, anti-family, anti-education, with their rotten inner city public schools that teach children how not to read with quack methodologies like look-say reading and whole language, when they know that English has to be taught phonetically, since English is a phonetic language. The result is that children are being thrown these taught to look at letters like they're pictographs, like they're hieroglyphics. So no wonder you have ADD and you've got dyslexia. They're scrambling the minds of our young people. They've turned education into a political soapbox as opposed to a means by which a young person can think on their own and think cognitively and actualize their own life. And this is particularly damaging to a Black family where there's no father, right? Where they're living under welfare, where there's crime. The child is getting less attention. So when you add the rotten school to that with their quack methodologies, you've got a further destruction of the Black community. So that's my thesis on that. And then, of course, the final thrust is that now that in spite of these racist policies, the Black community and the minority community has advanced. They have moved into the middle class. Racism has been reduced as an official policy and even as a real policy. You've got an upper middle class Black community that's growing and thriving. And now under President Trump, you've got the highest level of employment in history for African Americans and minorities. And you've got growing support for President Trump among African Americans, particularly males. This is something that is a great threat to the left-wing establishment and their use of the final card in their hand, and that is this business of microaggression. It was another one of these crackpot sciences that was developed at Harvard, which doesn't surprise me, by a professor named Charles Pierce back in the 1980s, perhaps 1970s. where basically you put a person under a microscope and you try to find a racist gene. Are they secretly racist? Do they not know they're racist? Is it unconscious that they're racist? You know, this inquisition, which is the ultimate manifestation of the worst kind of tyranny and totalitarianism. And I would note that they only use it against their enemies. You'll never see a liberal have to undergo this this colostomy. I mean, it's almost like like putting a probe up, an anal probe to look inside, to see, what is that called? I mean, that particularly men get, and women too, every 10 years. It's like they're looking inside you to see if they can find some secret racist gene. And then once they find it, which is, the whole thing is bogus, they're then going to hold that up and say, you see, we have found that you're racist. You should be fired. You don't deserve to be in public life. You don't deserve to show your face. I mean, this is complete Soviet style, Nazi style authoritarianism at its worst. And I mean, the only good side to it is that we should maybe realize that real racism has decreased to the point where now they have to make it up. And so that's what they're doing against President Trump. Anyways, I'm reaching toward the end of the program. For the caller who called me, please send me an email, Chuck Morse, number 4, ChuckMorse 4 @gmail.com, and I will send you a free copy of my book, The Nazi Connection to Islamic Terrorism, available at Amazon. All my books are available there. You might want to check them out. Just put my name in the server, Chuck Morse, Morse, and you shall see that I have published and self-published, I think it's about 15 books now. So I'm not bringing this up to have a shameless plug, but why not, right? Anyway, I want to thank you for watching, everyone. I have a guest, I believe, tomorrow. He is talking about how the communist, he's a man of the left, by the way, and I want to be very nice to him, but he's written about how the witch hunt alleged hit the state of Vermont in the 1940s and 50s, simultaneous with the investigation by Senator McCarthy of communism. I didn't realize there were communists in Vermont, at least before Bernie Sanders. But anyways, we're going to be talking about that with my guest Thursday. And I have another surprise guest on Friday. So stay tuned. Thank you. I'm doing the program Monday through Friday at 12 noon live here at Facebook. Check it out on YouTube. Please join my YouTube network. Subscribe. It's free. And, that's the one thing I am trying to do here is build up my YouTube channel so I can begin to monetize it. You need to have 1,000 subscribers. Right now, I think last I checked, I have 714. So it's building, but I'm obviously trying to find ways to continue to build that. So check out the Morse Force or Chuck Morse on YouTube, and please subscribe. Anyway, again, I want to thank you for joining me this afternoon. This is Chuck Morse. Have a good day, everybody.